The coffee goes cold. I have been holding it for 20 minutes without drinking. Watching my children through the kitchen window. Oren is teaching Blythe to throw a football. She is gripping it wrong on purpose because she likes watching him get frustrated. His face scrunches the way mine does when I cannot find my keys. The leaves on the main road have turned copper and rust, curling at the edges, and the October air carries that particular cold that sits in your chest before you feel it on your skin. Then the car. Silver, rental, nothing expensive. He learned at least that much. The man who steps out has not aged the way I expected. Thinner. The weight he used to carry in his shoulders is gone, replaced by something rigid, something waiting for impact. Lines around his mouth that were not there 7 years ago. On that rooftop, with the fairy lights and the garnet ring, Tobias Hargrove, sole inheritor of Hargrove Capital, a name that controls a real estate portfolio worth more than some country's GDP, a man who once had a corner office on the 42nd floor of a building with heated Carrara marble in the lobby. Marble so warm I could feel it rising through the soles of my shoes the one time I walked across it without knowing what it was. The father of my children, who does not know they exist. I do not move. My fingers have gone white around the mug, ceramic cooling against my palms. And I am watching him the way you watch a car accident in the intersection ahead. Not shocked, not yet. Just calculating distance, calculating time. How long before impact? He stops at the gate, doesn't open it, just stands there with his hands at his sides. And something about the way he holds himself makes me think of a man standing outside a church he is not sure will let him back in. And I am on my porch in a town I moved to under my grandmother's maiden name, holding cold coffee, wondering how a caramel apple at a summer fair last year could undo 7 years of vanishing. 7 years. That is how long it takes to build a life from nothing. To turn Nadine Calloway into Nadine Marsh. To raise 2 children who have never asked about a father, because I made sure the absence felt ordinary. The way some houses don't have basements and nobody questions it, but he is here, and the absence just walked into my yard wearing a face my son will recognize. Because Oren has the same jaw, the same way of standing with his weight on his left foot, the same habit of pressing his tongue against the inside of his cheek when he is thinking. My mind goes to the rooftop. It always goes to the rooftop. The cheap fairy lights strung up in the dark. Not the LED kind, the warm yellow ones that burn out after a season. His hands shaking when he pulled out the ring. Not a diamond, thin gold band, tiny garnet. My birthstone? He remembered. I said yes before I decided. The word left my body before my mind caught up. My hand pressed against my jacket pocket, where the ultrasound crinkled against my hip. 2 heartbeats. I was about to tell him. Surprise for surprise. Then his phone rang. And the words I heard through the October air changed everything. She doesn't know about the clause. The clause. The marriage provision buried inside a 50-page incentive trust, drafted by lawyers who charged more per hour than I earned in a week. The provision that required Tobias to marry before he could access the principal of his inheritance. The provision that gave his mother, Vivian Hargrove, approval rights over his choice of spouse. The proposal wasn't just a question. It was a key. A $10 million trigger dressed in garnet and fairy lights. I didn't know all of this on the rooftop. Not yet. I learned it in pieces over 72 hours, sitting on my bathroom floor with my phone and a cracked screen and 2 heartbeats growing inside me. But the shape of it was already there, the shape of the lie, the architecture of what I had mistaken for love. Now he is standing at my gate. 7 years later, in a town I thought he would never find, Nadine. His voice cracks on the second syllable. The twins are watching. Oren has stopped throwing. Blythe's eyes haven't moved from her book, but the page hasn't turned in 2 minutes. She is not reading. She is listening, cataloging, the way she has done since the day she was born. And I am standing on my porch, holding cold coffee, watching the man who once asked me to marry him, while the ring he gave me sits in a drawer upstairs, 300 miles from where he thinks it is. The question is not why he came. The question is what I do now that he is here.
Friends, welcome to the hearth. Some doors we close, stay closed. Others find their own way open. And the question is never whether they will open. It is whether we are ready when they do. There is a particular kind of terror in being found when you have spent years making sure you couldn't be. It means the walls you built were never as strong as you needed them to be. Or maybe it means someone cared enough to keep looking. Tonight, Nadine shares a story about a proposal that was also a transaction, a vanishing that was also a birth, and the 7 years of silence between a rooftop and a gate. If stories of hidden truths and impossible choices keep you awake, please like this video and subscribe to join our Hearth family. Your support helps us share these stories with people who need to hear them.
It started with a laundromat, a Tuesday, Bleecker Street, one working dryer, a vending machine that only took quarters if you hit it twice on the left side. A trick the regulars knew and the newcomers learned by losing 75 cents. I was folding shelter sheets. Industrial bleach smell. That sharp chemical clean that never quite feels clean. The kind that stays in your knuckles for hours, no matter how many times you wash your hands. I worked at a women's shelter on West 4th, night shifts, mostly. Intake paperwork and crisis calls, and learning how to hold someone's hand without flinching when they squeezed hard enough to leave marks. He sat 3 chairs down, reading a paperback with the cover torn off, faded jeans, work boots, cotton Henley washed too many times, the kind of soft that only comes from years of wear. He looked like every other guy in that laundromat, ordinary, tired, waiting for his clothes to dry so he could go home. You fold hospital corners, not a question. His first words to me. He said them without looking up from the book, like he was observing something unremarkable. The way you might say it is raining to no one in particular. My grandmother was a nurse. She would haunt me if I didn't. He smiled. Not a big smile, just the left side of his mouth, barely there. Like smiling was something he used to do more often and had gotten out of practice. He asked for my number. I said no. There is a reason I said no. My mother's second husband, Dale, the one who listened so well, he heard exactly where our savings were hidden. He listened with his whole body, the way therapists are trained to, leaning in, nodding at the right moments, asking questions that made you feel like the most important person in the room. And then he cleaned out the checking account on a Wednesday while my mother was at work and I was at school. And that was the end of Dale, and the beginning of understanding that men who listen like Tobias was listening are usually selling something. So I said no. He didn't push, just nodded. Same time next Tuesday then. 3 Tuesdays, 3 weeks of folded sheets and torn cover paperbacks, and the rhythm of a laundromat on a slow afternoon. He never asked again. Just showed up. Sat 3 chairs down. Read his book. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. The 3rd Tuesday, an elderly woman ran out of quarters. I watched him empty his pockets without making it a production. No performance, no look at me gesture, just coins on her palm and a nod and back to his book. Later, a kid couldn't reach the detergent on the top shelf. He grabbed it and handed it down and sat back down before the kid's mother could thank him. I didn't give him my number because he was charming. I gave it because he felt like safety, like coming home to a house where no one was keeping score. That was my first mistake. Not because he was dangerous, because I was so hungry for something good that I stopped looking at the seams. He told me he worked in development. I assumed construction. He let me assume. That was the first lie, though I wouldn't call it that for another 11 months. He developed properties, yes. He developed them the way Hargrove Capital developed them, purchasing entire city blocks and turning them into luxury condominiums with Degournay wallpaper in the foyers. Hand-painted silk with raised brushstrokes you could feel under your fingertips. He rode a private elevator to a corner office where the only sound was the mechanical hum of well-oiled machinery. And no conversation, because no one rode that elevator but him. But in that laundromat, he was just a man in worn boots reading a book with no cover. And I was a woman who folded hospital corners and smelled like bleach most days. And for a while, that was enough. By month 3, he wasn't just mine on Tuesdays anymore. He started showing up at the shelter on Thursday evenings, not to visit me, to work. He sorted donations in the back room, separating winter coats from summer clothes, checking pockets the way I had taught him because people forget things in pockets, and sometimes what they forget matters. He mopped the floors without being asked. Got on his hands and knees to scrub the baseboards in the intake room because I mentioned once, just once, that the bleach smell never quite reached the corners. And then there was Gerald. Gerald was a veteran who had been at the shelter on and off for 2 years. He didn't talk to most people, wouldn't even look at you if you were standing. Something about being looked down at had broken something in him. Or maybe it had always been broken and the looking down just confirmed it. The staff had learned to crouch when they spoke to him, to sit on the floor if no chair was nearby, to meet him where he was. Tobias didn't have to be told. The first time he saw Gerald sitting against the wall in the common room, he walked over, lowered himself to the floor, and sat with his back against the same wall. Didn't say a word for 20 minutes, just sat there. Gerald spoke first. I watched from the doorway. I didn't fall in love with Tobias in the laundromat. I fell in love with him on that floor. Watching a man in work boots sit in silence with someone the rest of the world had decided wasn't worth the effort. That was the thing about Tobias. He earned me in small amounts. Never grand gestures. Never flowers or expensive dinners or the kind of attention that feels like performance. Quarters for a stranger's dryer. Sitting at eye level with a man who had forgotten what that felt like. Showing up on Thursdays without being asked, and leaving without needing to be thanked. I told him things I hadn't told anyone. About my mother. How she died owing $43,000 to a hospital that sent collection notices for 9 months after the funeral. Each one arriving in an envelope the exact same shade of white, stacked on the kitchen counter like teeth. I told him about the night I slept in my car outside a Walmart in Queens because I couldn't make rent. How I left the engine running for heat and woke up with the gas light on, that orange glow on the dashboard, the loneliest thing I had ever seen. I told him about Dale, the second husband, the listener, the thief, how I had stopped trusting anyone who paid too much attention, because attention was just reconnaissance if the person paying it had plans you couldn't see. I told him all of this, every honest thing I had, and he listened the way he always listened, with his whole body, leaning in, nodding at the right moments. And I thought, this is what it feels like. This is what it is supposed to feel like. But I was wrong about what I was feeling, not because the feeling wasn't real. It was. The problem was that I was feeling a version of him, a careful edit. I found out later why he tore the covers off. The books came from a shop on Madison Avenue, a private dealer, first editions mostly, the kind of shop where the owner knows your name and your father's name and the name of the trust that pays your invoices. The covers had the shop's stamp on the inside flap. Tearing them off hid where the books actually came from. Hid where he actually came from. He spent his Tuesdays in a laundromat because he was tired of people wanting things from his last name. I understand that now. I even believe it was true. But understanding the reason for a lie doesn't make it not a lie. He chose to let me build a life on a foundation he knew was incomplete. And he let me do it because my ignorance was more comfortable than his honesty. I gave him every honest thing I had. He gave me a version of himself. Careful. Edited. A man in construction who happened to be extraordinarily patient. And I was too hungry for something good to notice the seams. What he was hiding behind the patience would take another 8 months to find. And when I found it, it would take me 72 hours to dismantle everything I had built and disappear. 11 months in, I knew his body better than my own. The scar on his left shoulder blade from a childhood fall. A fence he had tried to climb at 8 years old, trying to get a baseball back from a neighbor who wouldn't return it. The way he ground his teeth in his sleep. Quiet. But I could feel his jaw moving against my collarbone in the dark. The small sound he made when he was about to wake up. Somewhere between a sigh and a word that never quite formed. I knew these things. I collected them the way some people collect photographs. What I didn't know could fill a library. I didn't know about the penthouse on Central Park West with antique mirrors in the foyer that made one person look like a crowd. I didn't know about the Patek Philippe watches locked in a safe. The precise tick inaudible to anyone not wearing one. A mechanical heartbeat meant only for the owner's wrist. I didn't know about the driver named Gus who waited 3 blocks away in a black sedan whenever Tobias came to my 4th-floor walk-up with the radiator that clanged like someone trapped inside the pipes. 3 blocks. That was the distance between his real life and the one he let me see. The rooftop proposal happened in October. My building's roof, not his. Gravel underfoot and old lawn chairs someone had dragged up there years ago, the plastic straps fraying. Someone's dead tomato plant from the summer before. The cage rusted, the pot cracked down one side. Not the kind of place you would expect a proposal. But that was part of why I believed it. He had strung up cheap fairy lights from the hardware store, not the LED kind, the warm yellow ones that burn out after a season, the ones that make everything look softer than it is. They wrapped around the railing and the old antenna nobody used anymore. And when I came through the roof access door, I saw him standing there in the middle of all that borrowed warmth. Marry me. Simple. No speech. No rehearsed words about forever or soulmates or destiny. Just those 2 words, and a ring, not a diamond. That was the first thing I noticed. Thin gold band, tiny garnet. My birthstone? He remembered. He had asked once, months ago, what month I was born. And I had said January, and he had said garnets were underrated. And I had laughed because who has opinions about garnets? And then I forgot about it entirely. He didn't. I said yes before I decided. The word left my body before my mind caught up to it. And I was in his arms. And the fairy lights were flickering the way cheap lights do. And my hand was pressed against my jacket pocket where the ultrasound crinkled against my hip. 2 heartbeats. I had found out 3 days before. I was going to tell him right after. Surprise for surprise. Yes to his question. Then my answer to the question he didn't know to ask. We were going to stand on that roof with the dead tomato plant and the gravel and the hardware store lights, and become something more than we had been. Then his phone rang. He silenced it. It rang again. He pulled it out, looked at the screen. I saw the name flash briefly. Father. Clement Hargrove. His face changed, not dramatically, not a transformation, just a tightening around the eyes, a pulling back of something I couldn't name. Like watching a door close from the inside. 1 second. He stepped away. 3 feet. 5. Not far, but far enough. I heard fragments. The marriage provision in the trust. Father, I told you the timeline isn't. She doesn't know about the clause. The clause? I stood there, with the garnet ring on my finger and the ultrasound against my hip. 2 heartbeats pressed against my body. While he told his father about a clause I had never heard of, he hung up, turned back to me, smiled like nothing had happened. Sorry. Work. He called it work. I smiled back, said something about going inside, about the cold. My teeth had started to chatter, but not from the temperature. He wrapped his arm around me and we walked back down the stairs and he stayed the night. And in the morning he made breakfast and I said nothing about what I had heard. And I said nothing about the ultrasound still hidden in my jacket pocket. I needed 72 hours. The first thing I searched was the name I had seen on his screen. Clement Hargrove. And the world cracked open. There he was, my Tobias. Charcoal Tom Ford suit on the steps of the Met Gala. 3 years before we met. Smiling next to a woman in Valentino red, the dress the color of arterial blood. Her hand on his arm like she owned it. Marguerite Ashby, daughter of a shipping magnate. Vivian Hargrove had arranged their introduction when Tobias was 23. I found an interview. Marguerite, speaking to a society magazine about her brief relationship with Tobias Hargrove. Tobias was very clear that our arrangement was about keeping his mother satisfied long enough for him to find someone real. Someone real. Was I the someone real? Or was I the next placeholder who didn't know she was auditioning? The Hargrove Family Trust. 50 pages drafted by a white shoe law firm with offices in 3 countries. An incentive trust with a marriage provision and a spousal approval clause. Tobias could not access the principal, estimated north of 50 million, until he married. But not just any marriage. His spouse required approval by the sitting trustee. The sitting trustee was Vivian Hargrove, his mother. Vivian's personal assistant had once told a tabloid reporter off the record that Vivian kept a list of acceptable partners for her son, ranked by family net worth. I wasn't on that list. I wasn't in the same universe as that list. I was a woman who worked at a shelter and folded hospital corners and smelled like industrial bleach most days. And I had $43,000 in inherited medical debt, and a car I had once slept in outside a Walmart in Queens. The proposal was real. The love may have been real, but the timing was a contractual trigger. A $10 million key turned in a garnet lock. I called him. He didn't answer. I called again. When he picked up, I asked one question. What is the marriage clause? Silence. Highway traffic on his end. He was in a car. The driver, Gus. 3 blocks that turned out to be his entire life. Nadine, let me explain. What does the clause require, Tobias? It is complicated. My mother has criteria for inheritance. I was going to tell you tonight after I had already committed, when it would be harder to leave. That is not. I hung up. Phase 1, misinformation. I deleted social media the morning after the rooftop, left my phone in the apartment, GPS beacon I no longer wanted broadcasting. Let him think I was still there, still reachable, still processing. Phase 2, disinformation. I bought a Greyhound ticket to Chicago, never boarded, told one acquaintance I was going home to Ohio. I had no family in Ohio. I withdrew $4,000 in cash over 3 days, staying under the reporting threshold each time. Phase 3, reformation. The garnet ring went in the drawer with the wobbly handle, next to a utility bill and a takeout menu from a Thai place that had already closed. 2 objects that used to mean nothing, now holding equal weight with a ring that meant everything and nothing at once. I packed 1 suitcase. Grandmother's quilt. 3 days of clothes. The ultrasound I had planned to show him on that rooftop. I took Amtrak to Albany, a local bus to a town called Briar Ridge. I used my grandmother's maiden name at every stop. Nadine Calloway became Nadine Marsh. I vanished.
The ring in the drawer, the ultrasound in the bag. 2 objects that tell the same story from opposite ends. What she left behind, and what she carried forward. We don't always run from something. Sometimes we run toward the person we need to become. And the cost of that journey is everything familiar. Sometimes the hardest thing is not staying. It is deciding you are worth more than a clause in someone else's contract. It is choosing yourself when the world, when the person you love, has made it clear that your worth has conditions attached. If you have ever chosen yourself when the world told you to stay, this is where you belong. Please like this video and subscribe to join our Hearth family. What did she build in those 7 years of silence? What grew in the space between vanishing and being found?
Briar Ridge was a town small enough that nobody asked questions, big enough to have a hospital. My grandmother's friend Dolores had lived there once, dead 4 years by then, but her daughter Ruthie still had a spare room above the garage. $40 a week, no lease, no questions. The room smelled like motor oil and dried lavender. Ruthie hung bundles of it from the ceiling beams because she said it kept the spiders honest. That sharp sweetness cut with petroleum. The smell that would come to mean safety. I arrived in November with 2 heartbeats and nothing else. The twins came in February, a boy and a girl, born 3 minutes apart in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and the particular exhaustion of a body that has done the hardest thing it will ever do. I remember the window more than anything else. It looked out on a row of pine trees, dark green against the snow, and I stared at them during the contractions because they didn't move. They just stood there, patient, waiting for me to be done. Oren, I named him for those trees. It means pine tree in Hebrew, and I needed him to have a name that meant something solid, something that stayed. Blythe came out quiet, eyes open, looking around like she was already cataloging the room, already watching. She didn't cry the way her brother did. She just looked at me, and I swear she was taking notes. The birth certificates listed father unknown, 2 words that cost me nothing to write and everything to mean. Survival in those first months wasn't the romantic kind. It was cereal for dinner because formula costs more than anything should cost. The kind of math where you choose between diapers and heat. And you choose diapers because you can wear a sweater, but a baby can't sit in its own waist. It was falling asleep sitting up, because if you lie down, you might not hear them. And hearing them was everything. Hearing them meant they were still breathing. Still there, still mine. My hands cracked from washing bottles in water that was too hot. The cold faucet handle had broken. Stripped threading. Slight give when you turned it, but it wouldn't catch. Wouldn't turn the water cold. I never told Ruthie because Ruthie would feel obligated to fix it. And Ruthie had already given me more than I had any right to ask for. I got a job at a veterinary clinic. Front desk. Filing charts for dogs named after human foods. There was a golden retriever named Biscuit who came in every Thursday for allergy shots. His owner, a woman named Margot with gray hair and kind hands, always brought me coffee without being asked. Never said anything about it. Just set it on the counter and smiled. Small kindnesses from strangers kept me upright when my own pride tried to buckle my knees. The children grew the way children do. In small increments you don't notice until suddenly they are different people than they were last month. Blythe started with sharks at age 4, a library book about ocean predators. She carried it everywhere until the binding split, and I taped it back together 3 times before the pages started falling out entirely. Eventually, we had to get a new copy, then another when she loved that one to death too. I found her one morning trying to tape the 3rd one back together herself. Her small hands sticky with clear tape. Her face determined. Why sharks? I asked her once. She thought about it for a long time. She always thought before answering. Already so different from her brother, who spoke first and considered second, who had opinions about everything and shared them whether you asked or not. Because they do not stop, she said finally. They can't stop. If they stop swimming, they die. I understood more than I wanted to admit. I had been swimming for 4 years by then. No pausing, no looking back, just forward motion. Because the alternative was sinking. And I had 2 children who needed me not to sink. Oren developed differently, loud where Blythe was quiet. Confident in the way children are confident when they are performing certainty they don't actually feel. He decided at age 4 that bread crusts were suspicious and never revised that opinion. I cut them off every morning. A small concession to a small person who needed to control something, anything, in a world that had given him a father-shaped hole and no explanation for why it was there. I told them their dad wasn't ready to be a parent, that it wasn't their fault. Children are self-referential thinkers. They hear everything through the filter of themselves. What I said was, he wasn't ready. What they heard was, we weren't enough. I knew this. It kept me awake more nights than the money ever did. The money was a problem I could solve with hours and effort and the slow accumulation of enough. The wound I might be carving into my children. That was something else entirely. That was something that might not show itself for years, might not surface until they were grown, and wondering why they always felt like they had to earn the right to stay. Did I think about Tobias? Every single day. Not with love, not exactly with anger, with something heavier than both. A kind of accounting, math in bed at night when the twins were asleep and the house was quiet and there was nothing to do but add up the columns. If I called him, the twins would have everything. Private schools with manicured lawns and small class sizes. Trust funds that would pay for college and graduate school and whatever came after. Rooms of their own in an 11-bedroom compound with a private dock. A grandfather who would teach them to sail. A father who would show up every day instead of never. But they would also have his mother, Vivian Hargrove, the trustee, the gatekeeper, the woman with approval rights over who her son was allowed to love. The woman who kept a list of acceptable partners ranked by net worth, who saw marriage as a merger and children as assets to be managed. If I called, I would be inviting that woman into my children's lives, into mine. I would be handing Vivian Hargrove the power to approve or disapprove of every choice I made, every school I picked, every person I dated. Every way I raised the children she would suddenly have legal standing to claim. So I stayed hidden, not out of courage, out of fear dressed up as principle. I told myself I was protecting them. And I was, but I was also protecting myself from having to find out if Tobias would choose us over his inheritance, from having to watch him fail. From having to explain to Oren and Blythe why their father picked money over them. It was easier to let them believe he didn't exist than to let them learn he existed and didn't come. By year 5, I had saved enough for a down payment. A narrow house 3 streets from Ruthie's, yellow siding that needed repainting, but I liked the color. A porch with 1 step that creaked. A 2-note warning I learned to skip on the way in. The kitchen had a window over the sink where I could watch Oren and Blythe play in the yard, and I spent hours at that window, hands in dishwater, watching them become people. I built a life, imperfect, held together with scheduling and stubbornness and the particular kind of determination that comes from having no other choice, but real. Mine, ours. 7 years of silence, 7 years of swimming, and then Tobias found us. He didn't come with lawyers. That was the first thing I noticed. Saturday in October. Silver rental car pulling up to my gate. Not a town car. Not a Mercedes with tinted windows and a driver in a suit. A rental. The kind of mid-size sedan you pick up at an airport kiosk when you don't want anyone to know where you are going. He had learned at least that much. He stopped at the gate. Didn't open it. Just stood there with his hands at his sides, looking at the yellow house, the porch with the creaking step, the yard where my children were playing, our children, though he didn't know that yet. Or maybe he did. Maybe that was why he was here. 7 years had changed him. Not older exactly, thinner. He held himself differently now. Tighter, like a man who had learned that the next blow could come from anywhere. Hair longer than he used to wear it. He looked at the twins before he looked at me. I watched from the porch. Coffee in my hand, though I had stopped drinking it. Just holding it like a prop, like something to do with my hands, while the world rearranged itself around me. Nadine. His voice cracked on the second syllable. Don't. The word came out harder than I meant it to. Or maybe exactly as hard as I meant it. Don't say my name like it costs you something. You don't get to make this about what you have lost. He flinched. Good. How did you find me? He told me, standing at my gate with the October wind pulling at his jacket. He told me the whole story. Not all at once. In pieces. The way you confess something when you are not sure how much the other person already knows. Years 1 through 3, he had hired private investigators. The traditional kind. They looked for Nadine Calloway. They checked Ohio, my false trail. Chicago, the Greyhound ticket I never used. They found nothing. I was gone. Years 4 through 7, his father issued an ultimatum. Stop looking or lose the inheritance. Clement would donate every dollar to a charity Tobias could never control. 30 years of accumulation gone. The threat was real. Clement Hargrove didn't bluff. So you chose the money. No? His voice was steady now. Rehearsed maybe, but steady. I chose to wait. If I inherited, if I had resources my father couldn't control, I could look again without anyone threatening to stop me. Your father is dead. 2 months ago. He swallowed. I started looking again the day after the funeral. The day after the funeral, not the day of. He had waited one day of mourning, or one day of planning, or one day of making sure the will was filed and the assets were his. I didn't ask which. Post-funeral, he hadn't hired traditional investigators. He had found an OSINT specialist, digital forensics, facial recognition software that scanned publicly available photos across every social media platform, every tagged image, every background face in every crowd. Ruthie's daughter had posted a photo from a summer fair last year. Blythe was in the background, holding a caramel apple, looking at something off-camera with that expression she always wore. Cataloging, processing, watching. The algorithm matched her face to Tobias's sister at the same age. Confirmation took 72 hours. Found you in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. He found me in 6 weeks once no one was stopping him. I did the math. 6 weeks with resources versus 7 years without them? It proved his commitment. He came the moment he could. But it also proved the gap. He could have found me at any point if he had been willing to sacrifice the money. If I had been worth more than $50 million. I didn't know what to do with that information. So I filed it away the way I had learned to file everything. Next to the accounting. Next to the math. Does she know you are here? He didn't ask who I meant. My mother doesn't make my decisions anymore. Since when? The steadiness cracked. Just for a moment. Since I told her that if she ever mentioned your name with that tone again, she would lose the only heir she had. I didn't believe him. Not fully. Vivian Hargrove wasn't the kind of woman who lost. She was the kind of woman who waited, who adjusted, who found new leverage when the old leverage failed. But I filed it away. They don't know about you. I said it flatly. A fact, not a confession. They have never asked about a father. I told them their dad wasn't ready to be a parent, that it wasn't their fault. His face collapsed. Not dramatically, not a breakdown, a slow folding inward, like a building settling into its own foundation. He pressed his hand over his mouth and looked at the ground for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. You can't fix 7 years in an afternoon, Tobias. I know. You can't buy your way in. I know. And if you hurt them, if you show up, and then disappear, I will make sure you never find us again. He nodded, didn't argue, didn't make promises he couldn't keep. Just nodded. He came back the next Saturday, and the one after. Always the rental car, always stopping at the gate. He never opened it himself. Never crossed the property line without being invited. No gifts, no toys the first 3 visits. Just himself. Standing in the October cold like a man doing penance at a church he wasn't sure would let him in. The 4th time he came, there was an envelope in his jacket. I saw it when he reached for his keys. Thick, legal-sized. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize. But the second line read, Trust Administration. He didn't mention it. I didn't ask. But it sat between us like a third person at the table, taking up space neither of us was ready to acknowledge. Not real estate transfers. Something else entirely.
6 weeks with resources, 7 years without. The math is simple, but the meaning isn't. He found her the moment nothing stood in his way. But something always stood in his way before, and he let it. Trust isn't rebuilt in apologies. It is rebuilt in Saturday mornings, in standing at a gate you are not sure will ever open. Again and again. The question is never whether the gate will open. It is what we are willing to do while we wait. If you need to know what happens next, follow now. Please like this video and subscribe to join our Hearth family. Will the gate open? And what is in that envelope he won't mention?
The 4th Saturday, I was inside making lunch. Peanut butter and honey, the way Blythe liked it. Crusts cut off for Orrin because he decided at age 4 that bread edges were suspicious, and never revised that opinion. I was standing at the kitchen counter with a butter knife in my hand when I looked up and saw my son walking across the yard, toward the gate. I watched through the kitchen window as Orrin unlatched the gate. He didn't look back at me, didn't ask permission, just walked across the yard with that walk he had. The one that looked like confidence but wasn't quite. The one that said he was performing certainty because he didn't know how else to move through the world. 7 years old and already pretending. Tobias stood very still, not moving forward, not stepping back. Just waiting while a boy he had never met opened the gate that had been closed to him for 4 Saturdays in a row. You are the one who keeps standing out here. Orrin's voice. Direct. Unafraid. Or performing unafraid. Because that is what 7-year-old boys do when they want someone to stay. When they are terrified the person will leave and they are trying to make themselves worth staying for. I am. Mom says you are figuring things out. I hadn't said that. Not exactly. I had said he was someone from a long time ago, and that grown-ups sometimes need time to understand each other, and that I would explain more when I was ready. Orrin had translated all of that into figuring things out. Children are generous interpreters when they want something to be true. I am trying to... Tobias's voice was careful, not talking down to a child, not talking over him either, just meeting him where he was. Orrin nodded, considered, then stepped aside, leaving the gate open behind him. Not an invitation exactly, more like a test, a question dressed up as an action. Are you going to come in? Are you worth the risk? Tobias stepped through. I stood at the kitchen window with peanut butter on my fingers and a knife in my hand, and watched a billionaire walk into my yard like he was entering a cathedral. Slow, reverent, afraid of breaking something. Blythe was on the porch, book in her lap, the shark one. She was on her third copy by now, the other two loved to death. Her eyes hadn't moved from the page in 2 minutes. I knew because I had been counting. She wasn't reading. She was listening, cataloging. The girl who watched everything and trusted nothing she hadn't observed firsthand. 3 facts arrived at once, standing there at the window. Oren had my stubbornness, but his father's willingness to take risks. He was the one who opened gates, who stepped forward, who acted before he finished thinking. For better or worse, he was going to be the one who made the first move in every important moment of his life. Blythe was pretending to read because pretending was safer than hoping. She had been the witness for 7 years, the one who noticed when I cried in the bathroom with the water running, the one who saw what Oren refused to see because seeing it would mean admitting that something was missing. She didn't trust easily because she had learned early that the people you trusted could vanish, could leave you holding a book you didn't want to put down because putting it down meant looking up and facing what was gone. And Tobias was crying, standing in my yard, talking to a 7-year-old, with tears running down his face that he didn't bother to hide. His shoulders were shaking, his hands were shaking. Everything about him that had been braced and careful for the past 4 weeks was coming apart in front of a child who had just offered him the one thing he couldn't earn through patience or waiting or standing at gates. Access. I had prepared for anger, for lawyers in dark suits with custody papers and court orders, and the particular cruelty of the very wealthy when they want something that belongs to someone else. I had prepared for Vivian Hargrove arriving in a black town car with threats dressed up as offers. Her smile cold, her eyes calculating, and her checkbook open to whatever page would make me go away. I had not prepared for a billionaire weeping in front of my son, and I had not prepared for the understanding that hit me like cold water. Oren opening that gate wasn't bravery, it was hunger. The father wound I thought I had prevented by leaving, by hiding, by building a life where the absence could be explained away as timing rather than choice. That wound had been growing anyway. Quiet, invisible, like a crack in a foundation you don't see until winter, when the water gets in and freezes and the whole thing starts to shift. My son had opened that gate because he needed something I couldn't give him. Something no amount of peanut butter sandwiches with the crusts cut off could replace. He needed to know if he was enough to make someone stay. That night, after the twins were asleep, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine. The bottle Ruthie had brought last Christmas, some Virginia vineyard I had never heard of. The label was peeling at the corners. And the taste was oak and something almost sweet, longing in a glass. I pulled out my phone, looked at the contact I had never deleted. 7 years and I had never deleted his number. I didn't know what that said about me. Nothing flattering. The real question wasn't whether Tobias had changed. People don't change the way they do in stories, all at once. In a single moment of clarity, people change the way houses age. Slowly, one replaced board at a time, and you never trust the renovation until you have lived through a winter in it. The question was whether I could let someone in without losing what I had built. I thought about the envelope. Trust administration, not custody, not DNA tests. I had spent days turning it over in my mind, trying to understand what he was doing, what move he was making, what angle I wasn't seeing. And then I understood, not because he told me, because I knew him, because 11 months of laundromat Tuesdays and shelter Thursdays had taught me how Tobias Hargrove said what he meant, not with words, with actions, with small things that accumulated into something larger than any speech could hold. He wasn't trying to buy my house. He wasn't trying to give me something I hadn't asked for. He had restructured the trust. The envelope contained proof. Assets moved out of Vivian's control. The family portfolio reorganized so that no one, not his mother, not a board, not a clause in a dead man's trust, could ever hold approval rights over his choices again. The spousal approval clause was gone. Vivian was no longer trustee. The cage his father had built and his mother had weaponized had been dismantled. Piece by piece, before Tobias ever drove that rental car to my gate. He hadn't asked me to enter his world. He had burned the part of his world that would have crushed me. I didn't know if that was enough, I didn't know if anything would ever be enough. But I knew this. My hand was on the phone. The wine was almost gone. And somewhere in a rented silver car driving back toward a life I ran from, Tobias Hargrove was holding the proof that he had torn down his own inheritance to earn the right to stand at my gate. The porch light flickered. Oren's bedroom window was dark. Blythe's had a faint blue glow. Shark documentary. Always shark documentaries. The girl who couldn't stop swimming. The mother who finally could. I picked up the phone.